A lot of cookbook co-authors stay behind the scenes, but every once in a while, someone breaks out as a successful solo author. Welcome to Everything Cookbooks, the podcast for writers, readers, and cooks. This is Kristen Donnelly, and I'm here with Kate Leahy. Hey, Kate.
Hey, Kristen.
So we've both co-authored books and we've written solo projects. Co-authoring does give you some skills that it's basically unlike any other type of cookbook work, don't you think?
Absolutely. I would hate to call it practice because it's not practice. You're doing a real project, but it gets you more repetition in writing head notes. It gives you a really thick skin because you take criticism to make the work better. The first draft you write in somebody else's voice, or the first recipe you write in somebody else's voice, isn't going to be right. It takes a while to understand their voice, what they sound like. But in the meantime, you're just honing your skills as a writer, as a recipe developer, as a tester. I don't know, what are some of the skills that you think have been invaluable to learn?
Certainly the project management, which it's sort of interesting because I did a solo cookbook before I was officially a cookbook co-author, but I had been helping on books in other ways. But the project management for co-authoring is almost more intense, I think, because pieces are coming from different people and you have to manage who's reading what when. That it's almost when you get to a solo project a little bit refreshing because you're like, oh, I'm the only one I need to report to.
I know. It's like, oh, I can make the decisions on these are the recipes I want to do this week. And this is what I want to turn around next week. Wow, I'm the one who's calling the shots. I think an underappreciated element of co-authoring is how much time you spent just project managing, making sure everyone's on the same page, getting alignment between the editor, the publishing house, the author you're working with. And oftentimes those authors are people who have never written a book, so they don't know the inner workings of what a publisher is looking for. So you are kind of like a translator sometimes.
Totally. And sometimes in addition to the author, you have people on their team that you're working with. So it can be a lot of people management.
Yep. Personalities, for sure.
So today we are talking to somebody who has very successfully moved from being a co-author to becoming a New York Times bestseller in her own right, which is pretty awesome. So our guest today is Adeena Sussman. She is the author first of a book called Sababa, and her latest book is Shabbat, Recipes and Rituals from My Table to Yours. Shabbat is the Hebrew word for Sabbath. It's a day of rest that begins just before sundown every Friday in the Jewish tradition.
I think the way Adeena positions Shabbat is that it's something that feels really modern right now, the idea of taking a rest and having that downtime. For a lot of us, it could just be a day without our phone on us and see how that feels. So this book is really focused just on that ritual of reflection, of stepping back. And I think that's really an important thing to do any time of the year, but certainly in times where the days are a little shorter and a little colder. It also feels like a very cozy sort of practice. And it's a big book.
It's a big book. And I love that it includes recipes that are very simple and then others that are sort of that like, you know, all day cooking, getting ready for this day. I'm especially excited to talk to Adeena about her career, though. It's a long career and one where she's done a lot of different things, but I don't know her entire path to getting where she is today.
Right. I think the time that most people kind of maybe got to know her was when she became the co-author for Chrissy Teigen's incredibly successful cookbooks. And that might have been when her name started to be heard by a lot more people, but she was doing a lot of things before that step. So I can't wait to just talk to her about how she sort of found her way in this incredibly interesting part of cookbook authoring, and then how she's been able to become a best-selling author in her own right. So it's going to be a fun one.
Adeena, welcome to Everything Cookbooks.
Thank you. So happy to be here with two friends and colleagues.
Oh.
So nice.
Yeah, it's great to see you.
Thank you.
For our listeners who maybe don't yet know who you are or even know who you are now, but maybe don't know your background, I'd love for you just to talk about how you got started in food and then food writing as well.
So I'm cookbook co-author. I've co-authored, I think, 15 cookbooks or something like that.
Wow.
And 2 of my own now. I'm a late bloomer. I really started I'm 52 and I started working in food at around age 30. So I've been working at it for a long time, but I didn't start working at it right sort of at the beginning of my career journey. I worked in television production actually in my 20s. Always kind of knew that I wanted to work in food, but this was a time when working at the intersection of food and publishing, cooking and publishing had many less options than it does now. And that opened up in my mid to late 20s when I moved from Israel to New York and started working freelancing. I got a job eventually as a copywriter at Gourmet Magazine on the marketing side of the magazine and worked there for 3 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that was my first job in the culinary industry. Like many things that I ended up doing in the food world, I ended up doing a job that I didn't know was a job.
Yeah.
So, I wrote all of the special advertising sections for Gourmet Magazine at a time when there were often 100 pages worth of them in a single issue because it was the heyday of print publishing. Someone took a chance on me. I had no experience in magazine publishing. And I wrote everything from, single page advertorials about mac and cheese to 14-page sections about Barilla pasta, where I actually got to go to Italy and spend time there learning. And,
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
Yeah, it was, imagine the budgets.
Oh my gosh. I was just thinking that.
When you originally
Yeah.
said that, I just pictured you like churning out
No,
I don't know,
it
headline
was-
after headline or something.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's so cool.
there was a lot of that too, but there was also just a lot of, it was really a wonderful time under Ruth Reichel. And I somehow managed to burst through the church and state barrier and became friends with editors. And, I actually enjoyed my job a lot and I really learned the nuts and bolts of publishing, but I really did want to sort of always wanted to be on the other side of the magazine. And when we say the other side, for people who don't know, in the old days, there used to be a much more concrete division between what was considered advertising and editorial content, which really does not exist anymore in almost any scenario. But I had that job. Then I left and went to culinary school at the Institute for Culinary Education. And I also left Gourmet with my first editorial assignment. I got assigned to write a story about Yemenite Jewish cooking in Israel.
Awesome.
And it took me a couple of years to complete because I traveled several times there. But that combined with a lot of the recipe developing work that I did right out of culinary school. I worked with Ellie Krieger, who at the time had a healthy cooking show on the Food Network. Again, someone took a chance on me and I ended up working with her, developing recipes for all 5 of her cookbooks. I didn't write the books. I wasn't a co-author. I was truly like a recipe contributor with her. Mm-hmm. Did a lot of writing we all remember the days when there were 30 Epicurean magazines between the health magazines and the other magazines. There was lots of work and it was fun. And I was also writing a lot about Israeli food and wine, but I definitely had my sights set on writing cookbooks. I've always loved cookbooks and been reading them like books from a young age. And about 20, maybe even more now, 25 years ago, I started seeing the same woman's name on all the cookbooks that I was reading. I was like, who the hell is Melissa Clark?
Oh my gosh.
I was like, why is her name on every chef cookbook that I'm reading? And that's when I realized that cookbook co-authoring was a job. And I was like, oh, might be good at that job. I have cooking skills and writing skills, and I love cookbooks. And I just got really fortunate. Eventually, I got connected with my first cookbook agent and very quickly started co-authoring books. And it's hard to believe, but I looked back recently because someone asked me, and the first cookbook that I co-authored only came out in 2012, which is crazy. Yeah, which is crazy. And that I did so many books in such a short time and loved it and really viewed it as kind of like a training ground for writing my own books, which was something I had hopes and dreams of doing, but wasn't sure what I would write about or who would be interested in what I was writing. And yeah, it was like, I would say great training and also an amazing hazing ritual, because what you learn when you write cookbooks is no one really tells you what to do or how to do it.
So true.
It's so true.
And
It's so
on my
funny.
first cookbook co-authoring job, I spent the first 2 months waiting for someone to tell me what to do. And then I realized that I just had to to
figure it. Oh my gosh. Wow.
Because my authors didn't know what the hell was going on, and I didn't know what was going on. And it was for Hyperion Publishing, which was going out of business at the time. So there was like no oversight. It was like I was really just like hanging out there. So it was in a way incredible, because I just learned everything on that first book, and then really realized that I loved it and continued doing that. Then I wrote Lee Schrager's cookbooks, the founder of the South Beach Food and Wine Festival and the New York Wine and Food Festival. He did 2 road trip cookbooks, one about breakfast and one about fried chicken. And I had met Lee as a food styling assistant on his first cookbook in his apartment in New York City, when I was doing everything I could possibly do to get experience in this industry. I was also the restaurant critic for Manhattan Magazine at the time. I was really
just
doing a
hustling.
lot.
Oh my gosh.
I was hustling.
Yeah. I mean, what I'm hearing is it's sort of like, is it Malcolm Gladwell who has that whole idea of the 10,000 hours?
Yes.
And it seemed that maybe you did your 10,000 hours in a much shorter period of time, because, your journalism food writing school it sounded like gourmet, and you just get that experience of like creating copy, and then you can take
creating
that,
copy,
right?
meeting deadlines, pleasing clients, understanding business a little bit. Yeah, I think because I started later, I felt like I had a lot of like lost ground to make up time wise. And I just, age 30 to 40 for me were like go time. I just worked so much. I loved it. I wasn't making a lot of money, but I was making enough money to live on. And I just kept getting really fun opportunities. And, I'm not a person who says no to things if they're interesting to me and if I can learn something. So the food styling thing, I met Lee, almost burnt down his apartment, and So Lori Powell was the stylist. She was a fill-in food editor at, I think, Health Magazine when I was writing recipe stories for them, and we kind of hit it off, and she asked me if I wanted to be her food styling assistant. I was like, "Ooh, that sounds fun, interesting." So I showed up and was just chopping carrots quietly in the corner. And what I didn't realize about Lee Schrager was that he knew like every chef in town because of the festivals. And I knew a lot of chefs because I was a food writer. And I was kind of trying to hide in the corner because people kept walking in and being like, "Adeena, what are you doing here? Like, what? You're food styling?" I was like, "No, I'm just learning. I'm chopping carrots." So he kind of took an interest in me. I'm like, "Who are you? Like, you're not that young and you're a restaurant critic. What, who are you?" And so when he was afforded the opportunity to write books a few years later, he kind of remembered my name, and someone mentioned my name because I had started writing books, and we hit it off. We wrote 2 books. Then I got connected with Candace Nelson from Sprinkles Cupcakes, and I wrote the Sprinkles Cupcakes baking cookbook with her, and that became a New York Times bestseller. And that sort of opened up some doors for me because she had the same literary agent at William Morris as Chrissy Teigen. And then Chrissy Teigen and I were set up on a professional blind date. She had been discovered by Francis Lamb because he was a fan of her Twitter feed. He thought she was really funny. And she had a food blog that she had created in her early 20s when she was traveling with her husband, John Legend, on tour. Millions of people were following. And so he very wisely intuited that she might be able to put out a successful book. So we met up, and of course, because we're both supermodels, we hit it off immediately.
I want to hear more about this meetup. I mean, I'm thinking like, how nervous would I be for like a meeting like this? So tell me, like, set the scene.
I mean, I was like pushing 40, I think, when we met. So, or even older. I was nervous, but not as nervous as I would have been had I been younger. And it was 10 o'clock at night at the Bowery Hotel on Thanksgiving weekend. I first started at 6, and then it got pushed to 8, and then it got pushed to 10. And I just was like, all right, I'm going to roll with this. And I remember asking whoever told me where to meet them, like if I could have a contact phone number, which I never got. So I just kind of showed up at the hotel, and I looked up at this huge bouncer standing at the door of the hotel, and I was like, "Chrissy and John?" And he was like, "Right this way,"
and
gosh. So I just like sat at this banquette like facing away, like privacy. And I was very nerdy. I brought them a homemade cake that I had made. It was like, this is either a really good idea or a really bad idea. And yeah, we just started talking. We really just, they're just really nice, down to earth people. And we hit it off on a personal level. And Chrissy and I just sort of connected over food. I think when I look back on it now, she's half, white Norwegian American and half Thai. And so her cooking family life was like a lot of classic American food, and then a lot of her family's, Thai traditions mix in. And then I had the same kind of mix between my very Jewish background but my mom also was like the tuna casserole, Franks and beans, kind of sloppy Joe kind of cook during the week. And on the weekends we had our Shabbat food and our Jewish stuff. So like, I think even though on the surface we were so different, we actually had a lot in common, sort of that blend of our family background and our American sort of assimilation cooking, I might call it. I had written 3 books with her. I'm close with the family, and through her, I became a bit better known on social media, and also met my husband at the same time.
Oh, really?
Wow.
Oh, that's cool.
I met Jay and Chrissy in the same month, in
my
2014.
The stars had aligned.
Yes. We were set up on a blind date by a mutual friend.
Oh,
and
funny.
I was 43, had never been married, and was living my life, professional life in New York. And we hit it off, and he lived in Tel Aviv. And so I started traveling back and forth. That's the advantage of being a freelancer.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And then wrote Chrissy's first book, moved in with them for 3 months to get that book done. That was,
oh my gosh. Wow.
I've done that 3 times. Yeah. And through that, at the time she was only a mini megastar. She only had 2 million Instagram followers. Now she has 42 million,
Oh, wow.
But,
oh my gosh.
when someone like that tags you on a story, people start paying attention. And I was living part-time in Tel Aviv and posting a lot about my life in the Carmel market and my absorption into Israeli culture and food culture. And people started noticing and being interested in that. And then I wrote my Sababa book proposal in 2016. Because I had moved there, I had talked about writing an Israeli cookbook in the past, but I never felt quite right about it if I wasn't living there. I think cookbooks, ideally, if you're living in the culture and are part of the culture, that doesn't mean you can't write a cookbook if you're not living there. But for me, it just felt like that was the kind of book I wanted to write. And then that happened. And I wrote my proposal. My book sold and came out in 2019, only 4 years ago, which is kind of crazy.
It is. And it's a great book. I love it how in Sababa you have the hummus recipe, the star recipe, but then you also give people like, hey, just have canned, chickpeas. Yeah. Here's the recipe you can make. I just love that kind of like flexibility. You're thinking about you're always thinking about the cook and what they're actually grappling with. Yeah.
I think because, I really consider myself a recipe developer at heart. Like that's the core of my work. And, so I'm always thinking about the end user, and I don't think of myself as a chef, even though I have a culinary degree. I think of myself as a home cook for home cooks. So my recipes, I'm always trying to streamline them and make them as user-friendly as possible I say like they're simple, but not stupid, like I try to keep them interesting and not challenging, but stimulating, I would say. And, the writing is obviously a really important part of what I do as well. But the recipes are straightforward, I would say, even if they have a lot of elements to them. So and then Sababa came out, and here we are 4 years later. Shabbat came out, and that's, wow, I really have done a lot, huh?
You have.
Yeah.
I
didn't even realize the first book was out in 2012. But I also wanted to just highlight one thing, which is very cool, which is, some celebrities, when they work with a co-writer or ghostwriter, sometimes they actually want somebody to be a ghostwriter, and they don't talk about who they worked with. And it's so awesome that Chrissy did that and was very open.
Yeah, she's incredibly respectful and deferential to me and my work. And my name appears on every book as the co-author. And I'm integrated into the books as well. She writes about me. Mm-hmm. And that is unusual. And I don't take it for granted. But I think that's why we've written 3 books together, or not just one.
Yeah, it's a real relationship. Yeah.
It's a real relationship. They really are very warm and welcoming people. And it's always, when celebrities say, oh, we're homebodies. And you just sort of like, oh, come on, you're not really, or like when, And every like gorgeous actress is like, I was a tomboy when I was a teenager, you know, but they really are homebodies and their whole life revolves around their home and their kitchen. So like, it's really fun to be at their house. And now, now they have 4 children under the age of 7 or 8 and lots of people in and out. It's very fun and exciting and it feels fun to be part of the family and also, to have such a great working relationship with her. So it is nice to be acknowledged in that way.
Right. So it sounded like you always wanted to do your own books, sort of in the back of your head. Is that something that you always kind of like you were trying to figure out a way there?
I don't think I really realized that because, until I moved to Israel, I always wondered, like, what are you going to write about? Yeah, I had a very, rich Jewish heritage and I was, well versed in Israeli cuisine, but I was really happy as a co-author, quite honestly. I love the work. I loved and still love the work. I don't do it as much because I have my own stuff going on. I haven't co-authored a book in 3 years now because that was the last book was with Chrissy during deep COVID. It was like after Sababa had come out, I had done my book tour, thankfully. And then we did that a year later. So I think I knew I wanted to write cookbooks, but I didn't know that this would happen to me, and as quickly as it did. Like transitioning from co-author to author. And I think moving to a foreign country and like finding a story to tell that was unique and a culinary story that was unique, sort of an insider outsider in a different food culture and how to translate that food for American audiences. It kind of presented itself to me, but I definitely knew that I wanted to apply my trade in cookbooks, whether it was for other people or for myself.
Then getting to your latest cookbook, Shabbat, where did that come from?
Was it something that came out of your first book that you wanted, that you didn't have room for, or it didn't fit because the focus of the new book isn't so focused on Israel? It's focused, you have this beautiful introduction about growing up in Palo Alto and your family's rituals. How did the idea come out?
It really came out soon after Sababa came out. My publisher asked me to present another idea for a book, and which is amazing.
Yeah, right.
And I was looking for a topic that would sort of help me further. Like a reason I love to write cookbooks also deepens my own knowledge and of my life. And I don't just view it as a bunch of recipes. It's really like a personal exploration and journey. And the best cookbooks, I think, are ones that have like a really powerful narrative arc and they tell a story from start to finish and like sort of take the reader and cook like from the beginning to the end. Like it's like a journey. And Sababa was the story of the Carmel Market, which is the food market that is right near my home in Tel Aviv, and how I made friends in the market and talk a lot about the vendors and the culture of the market and using that as the sort of springboard for a discussion about Israeli cooking. And I was looking for a new concept that would kind of help tease out that Venn diagram between my Jewish cooking identity, my Israeli cooking identity, and my identity. And Shabbat just kept popping up because it's a holiday that 80% of the population observes on a weekly basis in Israel. About 21% of Israelis are Arab or Palestinian. They have different observances, obviously, but the Jewish population, which is about 79% of Israel, observes Shabbat either religiously or culturally, and many recipes are unique to Shabbat cooking. And I thought it would be a really interesting window into a culture that people might not know about Israeli cooking, because I think we all think we've learned a lot in the last 10, 15 years because there have been a lot of cookbooks and there are a lot of restaurants. But I really wanted to explore those home cooking traditions and also tell stories of immigrant cooks in Israel and the stories of their families, which is something that I started doing in Sababa as well. And so Shabbat just kind of kept popping up as an idea for a subject, and my publisher really liked the idea, and so off we went.
Did you have to write a proposal or a proposalette, or was it sort of like, here's a recipe list, what do you think, or what happened? Yeah.
I wrote a proposalette. It was not a full-fledged proposal. For Sababa, I wrote an 80-page proposal.
80 pages. What were in those 80 pages?
The introduction to the book, which basically is the introduction that I ended up using. It was very quick. My agent is Janice Dunno. And she's a former book editor and works very closely with her authors on their proposals. Let's just say that the first proposal that I wrote was not the proposal that was submitted for publication. And so there was a very detailed and fleshed out proposition for the book, a full chapter of recipes, a very robust like marketing section for like how I would market the book, with my 30,000 Instagram followers, which is still a nice number, but now my life has changed and my social media life has changed also, which is helpful in promoting cookbook.
Yeah.
And then there were obviously a chapter of recipes. It was more a sample chapter of recipes from different parts of the book. It wasn't like one
cohesive chapter.
Yeah. Also, I included some photographs actually, and a little bit of like history of Israeli cooking. It was quite intense.
Right.
For Shabbat, I wrote a 5-page proposal, and I did not even have a TOC, like a full like table of contents of recipes. I had like chapters, but I didn't have all the recipes fleshed out. And then COVID happened, and I actually wrote Chrissy's third book in the middle of the time that I was supposed to have started working on my book. And then I wrote that Gazo's cookbook, the sparkling drinks book that I wrote. So I got a little busy and with
other projects. How did you get the work done? Like, this is something that I'm always trying to figure out, and I've talked to Kristen about this offline, but how do you maintain your own energy for your own interests? Because co-authoring, it can suck up so much energy.
Yeah. So it didn't work for me to work on both at the same time. Once I was done with the Gazo's book and Chrissy's book, which was in December 2020, I got back to Israel and I worked on it all of 2021 and half of 2022, exclusively pretty much. I mean, I was doing other things. Like I started really investing in my social media, doing a lot of recipe reels and cooking reels because, my social media is not monetized. I don't do brand deals. I don't make money off of my Instagram, but I just use it as a way to like carry my audience with me along until my next book, essentially. And so I was trying to hold on to and grow my audience like through cooking, essentially. So I worked on it. It was still pretty intense, heavy COVID times. Somehow miraculously got it done. I still was so much harder than Sababa. It was so much harder than my first book. Wow. In so many different ways.
Right. Was some of the reason with Sababa, you had this really thorough proposal. You'd already written the introduction. So much of the work was done ahead of time. Was that part of the reason? Or is it, obviously working in COVID is a whole different situation, but.
Yeah, it was the proposal. And I think also like your first cookbook has a lot of like your culinary low-hanging fruit, the
totally.
recipes. Yes. Like I had like 30 recipes that I cook all the time that I did end up having, I still had to like codify them into cookbook recipes, but like the ideas were all the ideas that were just living there for so long and things that I make. And I really came to this Shabbat book with like a blank slate for so many reasons. Like it was COVID. I wasn't eating out. I wasn't even eating at other people's houses. Also, my social media kind of took off during COVID. So like people discovered Sababa because people started home cooking so much so my Sababa, I kind of thought, I'll do my tour and I'll go back to Israel and, but my Sababa had like a second and third life because of COVID and people it was like a word of mouth book, which was incredible, but I ended up doing a lot of interacting with my people about that book. So I was still kind of stuck in Sababa land when I needed to be like in Shabbatville, and, my books are pretty interactive. Like I go cook with like about 20 to 25 people, include their recipes in each book. And that was hard to do because of COVID. And also Shabbat is sort of an entertaining proposition and there wasn't a lot of entertaining going on. And honestly, my tank was it took me a while to get the inspiration back and sort of like, because of everything that was going on, with COVID and also just, I definitely had like sophomore slump fears. Like I felt like Sababa was more successful than I envisioned it was going to be. And I just, was really concerned with delivering something that people would like as much or would find compelling and interesting. And it was like a lot. It was a mental game for myself. I had to get over some humps of like just pushing through that like insecurity about what I was doing. And also Shabbat is as a concept is a little bit broader than the Sababa concept. It was pretty clear. And Shabbat for me has so many personal connotations because I grew up an Orthodox Jew and I observed the Sabbath a certain way in certain types of eating and certain ways of cooking. And I'm not that person anymore, but I wanted to be respectful of those traditions and also show people how I cook now and also give an accurate representation of Israel and, which is very complicated in any time and obviously in these times. So there was a lot going on beyond just like cooking and writing.
I have to say, I feel like none of this shows. Like, it's such a beautiful book and so well done.
Thank you. Well, once I got going, I think 2020 was the time that year when I just was like, I was really struggling to figure out what I wanted to say and how I wanted to say it and what the perspective of the book was going to be. And once I did, it moved faster. So I'd say I did the lion's share of the book in like a year and a half. It's a big book, as you guys know.
Right.
It weighs a ton. It's so heavy. It's like 16 pages bigger than Sababa, but it's also, they used a different paper stock. So it's a chunky book.
Yeah.
Feels right to me.
Yeah. Thank you.
You love everything cookbooks, right? Well, we love making it for you. And if you'd like to help keep us going, go to everythingcookbooks.com/support. There, you'll find links to our new merch, the coziest t-shirts and sweatshirts, and our bookstore where we earn commission from every book you buy. You can also leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to the show. Again, go to everythingcookbooks.com/support to find all the ways to show us some love. And thanks for listening.
When I write cookbooks, I try and create what I call forever recipes. Things that everyone can find recipes online or on social, and they're great. But, that's not for me as a consumer of cookbooks. Like, I don't want to buy a cookbook that has like corn ribs and baked feta pasta,
Yeah.
There's no value in that for me. And so like, I put my own values into what I put in for the people who actually spend hard money to buy our books. Like, in this day and age, that still amazes me,
Right.
So there's a lot of editing that goes on in the process. Like, actually had a corn rib recipe in the book because it was the first thing I just made because someone had made them for me and I liked them. And this was like in 2020 and we actually shot them. Like, we did a quick early photo shoot, but then by the time the book closed in like the middle of 2022, I was like, no, like, they went viral on TikTok and they just weren't interesting anymore. And like, they didn't feel like anything that I could add any value to. So I took them out, and that happened a few times. Also, like, I had a gluten-free challah in my book and I took it out because gluten-free challah is notoriously complicated. And I just need to make sure that my recipes need to work for everyone at all times. And it just felt unpredictable to me. So, I decided to take that out too. I really want the recipes to feel ironclad and also just like kind of not classic as in, it's not all like just roast chicken and potatoes, but just that they have like a feeling of things you want to make again and again and are sort of, they get into your soul.
Right.
Oh, yeah. That's a great way to put it. Who are you picturing as your reader?
Although my books are Israeli and Jewish in subject, like I have many non-Jewish cooks. When I write a book, I write assuming that the reader knows nothing about my background or culture and that it's my job to like explain everything in a way that everyone can like consume in a way that brings them into the know, But I'd say you don't need to be a super advanced home cook to make my recipes. The way that I write recipes, I try to have them be very conversational and instructional in style. Like I always say, I like people to feel like they're learning without knowing they're being taught, it's like not to be pedantic about it, but there's a lot of cues, a lot of sort of encouraging words, things not to not worry about. So I would say anywhere from a beginner cook to like a passionate home cook who cooks multiple times a week is my cook and my reader. And Kristen, you made some of the recipes for the book.
Yes, I did. They were awesome.
I do a lot of testing, a lot of recipe
Yeah, you really
testing.
do.
I both have amateur, like home cook testers who volunteer, and then I have 3 professional testers who I pay to test through the recipes in the book, especially because I live overseas. Certain ingredients behave differently. Like flour is different in Israel, and sugar is even different. Like the sugar is cut more coarse. So like making caramel, the times are different. Flour, there's more flour weight per volume because Israeli flour is very fine and powdery. So like that's why it's really important for me to have everything tested, and also just to like tease out any assumptions that I make about what people know and don't know about, both about Jewish and Israeli food and just about cooking in general.
It was fun because I don't think I've made challah before, except maybe like in culinary school or something. And then I made like, I don't know, I think I made 4 or 5 different ones. It was really fun. And it was so easy. Like I think it was one of those things I always thought was super complicated. And I was like, oh, this is so easy.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to trying that recipe. I wanted to know, with social media, how has that impacted the way you write recipes? Do you get feedback from people that makes you realize, oh, I need more information on this? Or do you kind of try to say social media is one thing, but I'm not going to let it just, because it can just suck up, like, it just takes so much energy to interact with everybody. And, there are different opinions out there. So how does that factor into how you write?
I mean, at this point, I have almost 200,000 followers on Instagram, and I'm very active in communication with my followers, especially when it comes to cooking. Like on the book tour, so many people were like, oh, I wrote you on Instagram. And my first question is always like through like fingers, like, did I write you back? And they're
That's
always
a lot
like,
of work.
yes, which, but I do, especially if someone has a cooking question, like that's sacred to me. And, knowing that people are cooking my food is always such an honor and so amazing. So I think that, social media has helped me understand who my audience is and the kinds of questions that they might have. And also just like on tour, so many people came through to say hi, to pay compliments or not sometimes, which is fine. But just in general, just a really, because I live overseas, like I don't have a lot of opportunities to connect with my cooks, so like this tour, a lot of it was meeting up with a lot of people who follow me on social media or I have relationships through Instagram. As far as the recipes themselves, the kind of things I make for Instagram are a little more simple than the things I make for my books. I do try and distinguish between them. I mean, because I think that's what the medium demands, but also because I'm trying to find that distinction between those more special recipes and things, I like the stuff I make for Instagram, but it's just a little bit different.
Yeah.
I mean, also social media, it's finding that balance between like what you share and also like, the progress of the book. It's hard to create new content when you're working so hard on staying fresh for your book, So I'd say that my social media was definitely a little bit on low burn while I was writing the book. I was still doing stuff, but it was harder to keep that inspiration level up for Instagram.
Yeah. Do your books come out in Israel or no?
They come out only in English. I have like quite a expatriate following in Israel of like Americans, British, Anglos, but they're not translated into Hebrew and sold in Israel.
Got it. Yeah, you've been on this like phenomenal tour. I think it's been
incredible.
2 months or something.
2+ months. Yeah.
Wow.
I'm wrapping it up on Friday.
Yeah, and we're recording this in November. So yeah, it's funny with book tours because for so long the wisdom was like, oh, book tours, do they really sell books?
Yeah, I mean, what do you think?
I mean, I think now because we were so isolated during COVID times, I feel like book tours have this new reason for happening. It's something for people to do, a reason to get them out of the house and interacting with other fans or other people who are interested in the same subject. So I feel that even though I think on the publisher side, book tours are getting less and less attention, like publicists don't have time. They don't want to put anybody on a book tour unless you are maybe, Stephen King or something. But it seems like on the other side, authors who make it happen and go on tours find incredible value. But I'm curious to see from your standpoint, how do you make the tours happen and what value do you find in them?
Yeah, so mine are like a real combination. The Jewish community is very engaged and connected around books. So I have done a lot of events in the Jewish community. But my publisher, Avery Books, is incredibly supportive, and they did help with parts of my tour, which is very unusual. And I'm extremely grateful for that as well. And I have, at this point, I also have a speaking agent.
Oh, great.
Smart.
Who helps me like arrange appearances that are paid. So like it's a combination, like usually events that are arranged through your publisher are not paid, but sometimes have like a minimum book buy attached to them to make it worthwhile for the publisher to send you somewhere. So it's like a whole mix.
It's a matrix or something.
It's totally a matrix. And then some of them are just things that I set up on my own, like through restaurants who do meals or friends or bookstore. It's kind of, I will say that my publisher is exceptionally supportive and involved. Avery doesn't publish a ton of cookbooks every year, and that's an advantage, I think. My publicist there, Anne Kosmowski, is like the greatest human being. I love her so much, and she's so passionate about what she does. And I did not hire a publicist for either of my books.
I was going to ask.
Which I know a lot, it's a big question that a lot of people have. And I actually am in favor of it. I think that in most cases, if you can afford it, it can really help. I think unless you're a mega star, publishers are not going to be dropping dollars and attention on you, unfortunately. And a lot of authors can feel neglected. And it's a really hard process after putting your heart and soul into a book to find an audience during tour and promotion time. So I think that if you can afford it, like having a publicist cannot hurt, can only help, in my opinion, in my personal opinion. But because Avery's so engaged and I think they do a really good job, I did not do that.
Right. And so you I was going to say, how do you keep it all organized on the back end for your own life?
I have like a part-time assistant.
Great.
She helps me with the things that I'm really shitty at, which are spreadsheets and organization.
Yeah. Same.
And like, and many other things, but like, I'm saying that is a huge weak spot in my wheelhouse. And my publisher does also like set up like a master document with like the dates and all that kind of stuff. So it's like a group effort. One thing I would encourage all authors is like, if your publisher gets the sense that you're willing to work your ass off for your book, they're going to do more for you. Really, like they sense the enthusiasm and the passion and the time and energy you put into it. And like, I think it makes a difference. I'm like, I'll do it. Yes. Whatever you say, like, yes,
yeah.
I'm a yes woman.
Until you burn out.
Yeah. I'm probably going to go home and like it's like a cartoon, like my body bones, like my whole body's going to like break apart into pieces. And like, I'm just going to like get a horrible flu and be in bed for like a week, but it's okay.
I was going to say the speaking agent is an interesting thing and something I think also interesting for listeners to think about, like as they grow their platforms and promote their book. Like, do you have a certain, like, I know sometimes people have these like set speeches that they're known for giving. Is it like that?
Not really. I mean, I do a lot of Q&A. It's usually moderated discussions with people. And I love that format because it keeps it much more fresh and fun. And I just always feel really self-important when I'm like standing up on a podium and like talking, like it's just not my style or my thing. A lot of times it'll be like a discussion and then a demo, like kind of mixed together. Like, so cool. You'll do like a 30-40 minute talk and then like a 15-20 minute cooking demo. I personally think that cooking demo events, like the cooking part, if it's too long, like people lose interest, and it can be, unless it's like a really focused group of people and it's set up as like a cooking class, that's different.
Yeah.
So tend to keep it a little bit lighter. And I think people are really interested in the author and they want to get to know the author better. I have found that people want more information, about my background, how I got to do what I do, my story, where I live, like all that kind of stuff. And also the speaking agent thing, like, it's not something that would have even been an option for me 2 years ago. It's something that was afforded to me because I guess I have a bigger, social media presence now or whatever, but I mean, there are all kinds of agents out there, and, I don't have a business agent or anything like that. I have a literary agent who helps me, Janice, and then sometimes they help me set up some gigs, which is a relatively new thing for me, but something I encourage authors to pursue because it's a great source of extra funds. And also these people have contacts that we don't have. And like, that can be really helpful.
Yeah. We talked to Adeena in November when she was wrapping up her book tour in the U.S. It was about 1 month after the latest violence between Israel and Gaza erupted, spurring the ongoing humanitarian crisis. In this part of the conversation, we talk about how it affected her. Basically, your book came out September 5th, around there, right? And then you're in the U.S. and October 7th happens.
Yeah.
Just for your tour, I'm curious.
Just your mental health, too.
Yeah, mental health, like everything.
Just to be clear for people who don't know what happened on October 7th. So there was a terror attack into Israel from Gaza, and then there have been a military incursion on Israel's part into Gaza. So it's been obviously a very painful time for everyone involved and lots of loss of life on both sides. It's been really devastating. So my first reaction was just total shock. And also I wasn't very functional. It happened to be the 1 week of tour that I was in New York without a lot of things on the schedule. So I did have a couple of events, but one of them was like a restaurant dinner. I was able to get it done. And then a bunch of chef friends and I did end up doing a charity bake sale, but it wasn't the usual kind of venue events. And then I did stop and think about whether I even wanted to continue with the tour for a variety of reasons. First of all, I actually couldn't physically get back to Israel because there were no flights at the time.
Yeah.
But I was scheduled to be on tour for another 5 weeks, and I had, so many events on the calendar, and I decided to take my lead from the events. Nobody canceled. I just decided that if people wanted to be together in community, that I was going to be there. And I eventually found it to be very supporting for me in this time. It's not like I'm not hiding my Israeliness or my Jewishness. I try not to. It's a book tour. It's not a political discussion. So, people are there to talk about the book and me. And, people have questions and I'm happy to answer questions. And did I pivot a little bit in my talks? Yeah. Definitely start the discussions, acknowledging the situation. But there are some hard, dark days for sure.
Yeah.
I don't really talk about it very much, but I do get a lot of, a very nice way of putting it would be feedback on Instagram about a lot of things about my life and career. So but I'm happy that I continued. And, my hope is that this can end tomorrow with no more loss of life on both ends. That would be my dream.
Yeah.
We had Ara Zeta on the podcast, and he talked about, the kind of comments he gets through social media. And it's the hardest part is when you start to grow your platform and meet so many wonderful people who are excited about what you're doing. The downside is that side. So I think the way you're putting it in perspective, it's the right way.
And, there's all kinds of people who reach out to you. Yeah. A lot of the people who send the most painful or horrible comments are not followers necessarily,
right? Or
aren't really interested in having a real conversation. So so if people who want to talk and discuss things, I'm always willing to have a civilized discussion about the situation, which is complicated and painful for everyone involved. But it is part of that, and it gives me a lot of empathy for people who are a lot more famous than I am. I have a small slice of, I have my very defined audience based upon what I do. Imagine what it's like, amplify it by 500. Everyone expects everyone to be an expert and to have an opinion about every conflict that's going on in the world. And it's really exhausting,
Yeah.
So it is par for the course. And you know what? People might not agree with some aspects of my life, where I live and what I do, and I respect that, and they're entitled as long as they are not abusive. That's all.
Yeah.
But thank you for asking.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing. I was thinking about you a lot, and
thank you.
I'm sure it meant a lot to your community to still show up and share your book and share yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. The book is about gathering around the table and having meaningful time with friends and family over food, and It's an age-old tradition. Shabbat is an age-old tradition. And it's weird just to talk about ancient traditions that are trending, but Shabbat is pretty trendy right now. A lot of people are doing Shabbat dinner. I think, like we said, sort of coming out of COVID, COVID was the isolation we didn't want. And maybe we spent too much time with certain people in our lives. but now we want to gather in meaningful ways and appreciate being together and elevate it in some way. And that's really what Shabbat meals are about, is about elevating your table in a spiritual sense and in a edible sense as well.
Yeah, it's something I feel like even if you're not Jewish or not even particularly religious, just a concept
of a pause in the week and just a time to connect.
Yeah, it's a pause. There's a Jewish rabbi who called it like a cathedral in time or a palace in time. And basically it's about taking time and putting it in its own special space and kind of suspending it for a little while, honoring that time as something different than the rest of the week. And I love that idea. And you can expand or contract the amount of time or the space that you give it, but it's about leaving room for meaning. And I think, in these day and age when we're just inundated with messages and communication and media, sometimes it's good to just strip things down to the basics. Like, people who keep Shabbat in the strict sense of the word don't use technology for 25 hours, and like that's seeming more and more appealing to me all the time.
Yeah, I was just thinking that.
I was wondering actually if you practice that part of it.
My husband, Jay, he's actually even less, I'm not religious at all anymore in a ritual sense. My husband, even less so, but he's way better about putting the phone away. I think because of what we do and like the world we live in, it's very hard for me to do that. But Fridays are not a work day in Israel. So sometimes like that's a day when I try and just be off the phone a lot. And Sundays are like my favorite day of the week because Sunday is a work day in Israel, but it's not in the United States. And so I'm getting a lot less media messages from people. But I'm learning. And I think the last 6 weeks even have I'm going to recommit to sort of going on a social media diet, tapering down a little bit, especially on Shabbat, because I think it'll be really healing and helpful.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for this conversation. It's just so great. It's just so inspiring what you've done with your career and all the different parts of the food business and the media business you've worked in. I think it's all kind of coming together at the right time for you. And I wanted to know, as we wrap up, do you want to share your next book?
It's called Zariz, and it's like a quicker, easier Israeli dinner cookbook, basically. Sort of, I want the recipes to be really I'm cooking a little more like that myself. And I find I really enjoy the challenge of creating simple recipes. I mean, what people don't realize is that easy recipes are much harder to develop because every ingredient and every technique has to have impact, and I'm going to set some guidelines for myself about the number of ingredients I'm going to use. And also I'm really going to try and steer away from my books now because they really dip deeply into the Israeli pantry. There are a lot of sort of staple recipes and sub recipes. And this book, I'm going to really try and keep all the flavors on each page and not have, make this to use in this recipe. I'm going to try and have everything right there. So I think that's going to be a really fun challenge. And I'm excited to, the Shabbat book dipped a little bit more back into Eastern European flavors that I grew up with. And Zariz is going to be pretty firmly back in the Middle Eastern and Israeli culinary lexicon. I'm pretty excited about it. So I'm going to start when I get home.
Can't wait for that one.
Yeah.
Sounds great.
Thank you so much, Adeena.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. I'm so honored. I respect you both so much and such a cool podcast that you guys are doing. And I was so happy to be invited to do it. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Everything Cookbooks. For more episodes and ways to support us, go to our website, everythingcookbooks.com. The show is available wherever you get your audio, and if you like what you hear, please leave us a review. Any book mentioned in the show can be found on our affiliate page at bookshop.org. Thank you, as always, to our editor, Abby Circatella. Until then, keep on writing, reading, and cooking.